Innovation often comes with controversy. Cryptocurrencies and the underlying technology of blockchain are certainly a very visible contemporary example of such a controversy. In this talk, Yannick and I will present an emergent research agenda on what we call controversial innovation. We aim to develop a relational geographical approach towards analyzing empirically how controversial innovation unfolds. Let's look at the Bitcoin controversy very quickly at the beginning. When you screen the newspapers and read the media, oftentimes you meet statements like this one here, sorry. The anonymity of cryptocurrency transactions means that they appeal to criminals and bad actors. Published in the reputed journal Nature. And opposed by another statement. The lack of anonymity and the traceability of blockchain makes corruption more difficult than with traditional money. So the World Bank and Nature take two different positions in this controversy, but they refer to the same topic when they make their opposing arguments. So here we are. What is a controversy? Looking at the different literatures in the philosophy of science, in the sociology of science, and in other literatures, we have identified a set of common sense elements of a definition of controversy. A controversy is a public and persistent exchange of arguments between people, having a disagreement over either empirical facts or conceptual interpretations, and where all incompatible views subscribe to a common conceptual framework for them to have reasonable claims to truth, which is necessary to potentially reach closure. Now, I know that these are many different elements here on the list, but they are crucially important because they make sure that, first of all, because a controversy is public and persistent, it is observable. It can be analyzed. Secondly, the disagreement about the positions over facts or concepts are united under a common conceptual framework, meaning that they are commensurable. So the parties that have the controversy subscribe to a common understanding, and therefore it is possible to solve the controversy, at least theoretically at some point. The definition makes sure that conspiracy theories and disputes between incommensurable different worldviews are not part of the analysis because they cannot theoretically really be reconciled. So how does this relate to our interest in controversial innovation? We have looked at all the articles published in journals that form part of the Web of Science over the last 30 years. And we see that the interest has focused on concepts such as radical innovation, disruptive, and breakthrough innovation more recently. However, we can also see that interest in the controversies that innovations face in the process of their diffusion have not really received a lot of attention, although that interest is also moderately increasing. So what we argue is, by drawing on Eckhardt and colleagues, is that if we distinguish between the technology, the object on the one hand, and the social process on the other, separately, we will refrain from understanding the reasons behind the failure or success of an innovation. Instead, we will have to integrate this into a more comprehensive process view of innovation. So we don't define controversial innovation as an entity that has certain properties that in themselves are controversial. But instead, we define controversial innovation as a situation or a temporal phase of contestation in the process of innovation with indeterminate outcomes. Innovation failure, innovation success, or something in between where the innovation or the resistance get transformed in the process. So there are three basic research questions that motivate our research here. The first one is, how are controversies constituted? The second one, how are they conducted? How are they enacted in practice? And thirdly, how and being geographers, we're of course interested in the where does innovation actually succeed. Now, each of those questions speaks to one pillar in this analytical framework. The question about the constitution of a controversy asks for an analysis of the logic. How do actors argue? What are their premises and conclusions? How does the controversy in itself evolve? This analysis refers to text. It uses discourse analysis, and it draws on argumentation theory. The second pillar is with a focus on the practice level. How are actors positioned in opportunity structures of networks and resources? How do they mobilize resources? How do they create alliances? And thirdly, we're interested in what we call spatial pockets of innovation. This brings in the geographical view, a place perspective. What are the institutional and also the jurisdictional advantages that some places, by their specific social configuration, offer for an innovation to succeed and overcome the resistance? And how do those spatial pockets of innovation speak to eventually a global controversy? So now I hand over to Yannick, and we try to bring this framework in part into practice and go back to the case of the crypto controversy.
In order to apply the theoretical framework of controversial innovation, I will first talk about the logic of the controversy. We were screening the public and academic debate and extracted 6 different topics. The first one concerns the raison d'être, meaning the reason or justification for the existence of cryptocurrencies. Due to their irrelevance, Krugman makes clear that he is in opposition to cryptos, and this gets contrasted by 2 scholars who support the position that cryptocurrencies in her great potential. Arguments clash when looking at the environmental impact. While opposers state that the emissions produced through Bitcoin mining could push global warming above 2 degrees, supporters see the great potential in the technology and take the example of Ethereum paving the way for Bitcoin's sustainability transition. The third theme surrounds the social inclusion, respectively exclusion, created through the adoption of cryptos. One strand of arguments emphasizes that the biggest investors in crypto come from advanced economies, but the harms mainly lie in emerging countries. The opposite argument is that the emergence of new digital currencies can help skipping unfair financial circumstances and governmental suppression. Criminality is one of the hot topics associated with crypto. On the one hand, there are sources which assume illegal transaction an important driver of the crypto adoption, while others consider that the share of illegal activities in connection with cryptocurrencies is even lower than with regular fiat money. And this directs me to the issue number 5 in the argumentations, if cryptocurrencies as an investment are a safe haven or not. For example, some see Bitcoin as too volatile, while others argue that especially in countries with unstable currencies, the cryptos can act as a potential hedge against inflation. The last field of dispute is one of the most fundamental ones, especially when we argue about Bitcoin. Here the question regarding centralization pops up, and different arguments arise whether cryptocurrencies still keep their original promise of decentralization, as the research shows that nowadays there is a tendency towards centralization at various levels. Now that I have outlined the 6 different issues in the crypto controversy, I would like to take a closer look at the exact examination of the arguments. The highest level in the argumentation is the position. A position is the main thesis on which an argumentation is based, and in principle 2 or more positions are opposed to each other in a controversy. These positions do not usually stand in a vacuum, but they are supported by a variety of arguments, which themselves consist of premises and conclusions. A premise is a statement in an argument that supports reasons or support for the conclusion, and a premise can be true or false. From the premises, one draws conclusions to support the main position. These conclusions can be valid or invalid. And if the premises are true and they relate to the conclusion, then the conclusion must be valid. If the premises are false or they do not relate to the conclusion, they are invalid. Premises and conclusions then lead to an argument. An argument is a set of statements consisting of at least one premise and exactly one conclusion. An argument is sound if it fulfills the requirements that first, the premises must be true, and second, the conclusion must be valid. Due to the time available for this talk, I will only shed light on two of the arguments in more detail and disentangle the logics. Krugman sees no use in cryptos and supports the position that cryptocurrencies should not be supported. He does this with two premises. The first one is that technologies introduced between 2009 and 2012, like the iPad and Zoom, have become a major part in our lives. And we can say this is a true statement. The second premise is that Bitcoin was introduced in the same period of time and it plays no role in our today's normal economic activity. And I would say this premise is true as well. Based on this premises, he draws the conclusion that cryptocurrencies are a non-starter and have to be given up. But here I have some doubts. Even though the premises are true, I miss the tight link of premises and conclusion. So my overall valuation leads to the assessment that due to the missing interference, the conclusion is invalid. And so the overall argument is unsound. In contrast, there is the argument that cryptocurrencies can become a major part of our normal activities. The first premise is that the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies shows clear parallels to the email and internet technology. Both focus on bilateral interactions and the development and maintenance is open, distributed and shared. And just like email, Bitcoin first caught on with an enthusiastic but relatively small community. The second premise is that it took more than 30 years for the IP technology to reshape the economy. So, the authors conclude that due to the parallels with the IP technology, cryptocurrencies are far from reaching their full potential. Here we can also say that both premises are true and they relate to the conclusion. So we have a valid conclusion and thus also a valid argument. I hope these illustrative examples gave you an insight on how we can approach the logic of a controversy. Without going into detail to the second pillar, which is the relational structure, I will skip on to highlight briefly the geographical aspects in controversial innovations, and I will touch upon the spatial pockets of innovation. The exciting thing about targeting controversial innovation is that the controversy and the discourse might be of a global nature, but it materializes in certain geographical locations. Here we have special situated social relations, institutions and regulations which together build configurations of resistance or unfolding. Here we brought 4 examples of places that are characterized by resistance. And through that we want to emphasize the geographical aspect in investigating controversial innovation. One of the best known examples is China, where regulators banned cryptocurrencies in 2021. The same applies to Bolivia, where the use of virtual currencies is prohibited since January 2022. Here we have the statement of Sweden's authorities who call for the prohibition of energy-intensive crypto mining, while Iceland already cuts its green energy supply. However, there are also locations where cryptocurrencies can unfold. We call these places spatial pockets of innovation. Here, controversial innovations gain advantage through its localized institutional context. Famous spots where cryptocurrencies gain momentum are the canton of Zug in Switzerland or the country El Salvador. The canton of Zug is the heart of the so-called Crypto Valley and home to more than 500 blockchain and cryptocurrency companies, and it accommodates important players such as the Ethereum Foundation. And people can also pay their taxes with cryptocurrencies there. The other widely known example is El Salvador, where the country's government introduced Bitcoin as a legal tender. Maybe less famous are the 2 other spatial pockets of innovation, namely Vietnam and Ljubljana. Vietnam is the country that got ranked first in the global crypto adoption for the 2nd time in a row. And Ljubljana, the capital of Slovenia, is the most crypto-friendly city in Europe.
Let us conclude this talk very briefly. We have proposed a concept of controversial innovation that is not a categorical one. It's not a thing that has properties that are controversial, but controversial innovation is a period, a phase in the process of innovation where an innovation meets resistance. To address and analyze controversial innovation in the process, we have proposed an analytical framework that includes analysis of the logic, the relational structure, and the spatial pockets of innovation, places in which a controversial innovation gets traction and succeeds and diffuses. We believe that this is a starting point for a broader research agenda on controversial innovation that emphasizes the social process and the legitimacy that innovations need in order to be adopted more broadly. Thanks for the attention.